Hi, everybody. Welcome. We will give everyone just a couple minutes for folks who are still logging on to join us. But in the meantime, welcome to those of you who are already here. If you are new to Print Center, especially a very big welcome. I'm Jen Bradovich. I'm our Director of Exhibitions and Programs here at Print Center New York. And thank you all for joining me for this conversation this afternoon, Rituals of Resilience. This talk is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, New Voices Ritual, which was organized from our annual open call by Olivia Shao, the Berger Collection, and TOI Meets Art Curator at the Drawing Center, with Ruben, Siddall, our own exhibitions and programs coordinator. The show is on view at Print Center New York's George Schnitzer Gallery until August 24th. New Voices is a program that supports the development of emerging artists. And so in that spirit, the public programming for New Voices is artist-driven, and it responds to the interests of the artist cohort in contextualizing their own practices. So organizing of today's conversation was led by our New Voices artist, Jonathan Sánchez Noa. Jonathan is joined in conversation today by artist Seba Calfuqueo and Koyoltzintli for a conversation that explores how their interdisciplinary work uses tactics of Indigenous survivance and African diasporic traditions to address ritual, resilience, and belonging. And I am also happy to welcome Print Center's newish Curatorial Associate, Alex Santana, who is going to be moderating the conversation today. But before we get started, just some very quick housekeeping. The program has auto-generated captions. You can turn them on with the CC button at the bottom of your screen or in the settings menu on mobile. The talk is also being recorded and will be available in about a week or so on our YouTube channel. The chat is also open and you can contribute to the conversation there. Please say hello, tell us where you're joining us from. And you can also send questions using the Q&A function. We'll take questions at the end. Okay, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Our participants for the program can join me on screen. You guys can turn your cameras on. Hello, hello. Welcome, Alex. Welcome, Jonathan, Seba, Calfuqueo. Thank you for being here. All right, Alex, I will hand it off to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Jen, for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much to everyone who is tuning in today. Thank you to the panelists for joining me and to Jonathan for brainstorming this lovely panel today. I'm really thrilled to be in conversation with three artists whose work I deeply admire, three artists whose work encourages me to think about why I am alive, why we are humans on this planet Earth. And yeah, I guess I would like to begin today just by grounding us in place. I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York, specifically Bed-Stuy. I'm originally from Newark, New Jersey, but all of this is Lenape-Hoking territory. And I would love to ask each of you panelists to introduce yourselves briefly, let us know where you're from and where you're currently calling from. And then also in the spirit of the exhibition New Voices and the title of this panel, to kind of briefly introduce us to what ritual means for you in your life, whether that's a daily practice or a spiritual practice, or a practice that helps you, that facilitates a creative process. And maybe we can start with Seba, and then move on to Jonathan, and then Koyoltzintli. Seba. Thank you.
Mari Kompu, Lamien Kompu Wenui. Hi, everyone. Hi, friends. My name is Seba Calfuqueo. I'm from Chile. I'm artist. I'm curator in Espacio 218, a resident here in Santiago. I live and work in Santiago de Chile. My work is focused in the idea of queerness and Mapuche identity. Mapuche is people living between Argentina and Chile, and Mapuche means people from the land, and we have a very strong connection with the land and with what means the land and the relationship with them. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Sánchez Noa. I was born in Havana, Cuba, and I'm currently based in Brooklyn, New York. My work deals with histories of colonial extraction, and ritual is a big part of, I guess, my practice and the way I use my materials and the way I process my work. I use a lot of natural fibers from the island, from the Caribbean, and also different places here in America. And I kind of like use them in a way to evoke and recreate different mythologies in order to like mitigate histories of colonial erasure. So I primarily use like Cuban tobacco and tobacco plants to bring in these histories into my work. And I feel that ritual in my practice plays a role of kind of like creating these new histories or new mythologies that still are grounded in the Caribbean or Latin America. And to me, it's very important to do so because I feel that materially you can really like imbue our works with very specific energy, which I feel like all of us do in certain ways. And it's important to like talk about very specific materials that, in my case, were part of like the greater, like larger history of colonial extraction in the Caribbean, which tobacco was one of those materials that was extracted. So in my work, it is important to have it as in the forefront to kind of speak of these histories, but also bring awareness to the cultural richness of this context, specifically my context in the Caribbean, and to kind of keep these histories alive through new mythologies and new ways of reanimating these cultural movements in the Caribbean.
Thank you. Koyo?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Seba, and thank you, Jonathan, for that presentation. My name is Koyoltzintli. I am currently in New Jersey. I come from Ecuador, from the Pacific coast. I'm by the ocean. I grew up by the ocean. And for me, I was thinking about ritual, and there's so many definitions and so many ways I think about ritual, and I invoke it, and it's part of my practice. But there's something that I heard recently by Cecilia Vicuña that I thought I'm going to share that today with all of you. And she says, ritual is the moment that you enter a space and you abandon yourself. And in this space, there's so many people. And at the same time, there's no one. And you honor that. And I thought that that was really beautiful. So I just wanted to share that. I work in ceramic. I do performance, and I'm currently really thinking about ancestral sonic instruments and how we bring them into the present and how they speak to us and how they carry information, codes, knowledge for us to live in this time. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for those beautiful introductions, and also for kind of guiding our conversation organically towards the next point, which is exactly about materials. I've been thinking a lot about materials, and traditionally in the Western canon, artists are purchasing or consuming materials. It's a very kind of like extractive and consumptive process. But I think for the three of you, there's probably a different relationship. Materials are not just objects, they're living entities in some cases. They carry histories, they carry knowledge, they warrant respect and witnessing. So I was hoping that you could just talk a little bit more about what are some of these materials that you use and your relationships to them, and how that shows up in the work. And anyone who feels moved to speak, by all means.
I can jump in. So based on like a lot of the conversations that I feel that I have with a lot of my peers and that I've been having with you guys is the importance of not only reanimating these histories through materials, but also to bring awareness of the cultural values of these materials, right? So in my case, tobacco is a very important element in ritual, Afro-Cuban rituals, but also like Taino, like Aboriginal rituals. And in Cuba, they have been a huge element, not only of cultural heritage, but also of a material that has been used for thousands of years or hundreds of years by Taino Indians, but also by the Africans that came through the transatlantic slave trade that later became and kind of basically recreated African religion in the context of Cuba or the Caribbean. And tobacco has always been used for rituals, to do offerings, but also to reanimate a lot of the spiritual practices and the spiritual objects used by these groups. And in my work, it is the forefront of that, right? How can I like reanimate a very specific culture through material and through process? And in this piece, I kind of use paper making techniques to kind of integrate the materials within like all these natural fibers and all these pulps to create my own mythology within the context of Afro-Cuban religion, but also my own interest in spirituality and material significance. And I feel it's so important to do so because something that has happened throughout the ages is that colonialism is a big engine of, in a way, of cultural erasure when they kind of like come into specifically what happened in the Caribbean and what has happened in South America. So for me, it's a way to recreate a lot of these histories in a different way, but using those materials that signify a very specific ambience or a very specific energy. And I feel like materially that can be achieved, at least for me. My practice, materials are always the forefront of spirituality, activation, but also to create a very specific connection to a very specific place. Speaking with a very specific voice, which I think is important to keep, with a very persistent way of creating to use these materials. And my work has always been a main interest to do so. And papermaking and sculpture are a good way to integrate these histories materially.
Hello again. For me, the materials is really important in my practice. I think I use a lot of technique in my practice. I use my own body. I think as a queer person, it's very important use my body. I use ceramic too, and I think the ceramic has a lot of process, has all the elements inside of the ceramics, and it's a very long process to get the object. And for me, ceramics not an object; it's a process for transform the air or transform the land in something beautiful, and I think has a lot of energy inside. And for me, for example, the concept of ritual has a lot of it's about repetitive acts, but it's about a connection with something, with a entity. In my case, is the nature. And I think the Mapuche cosmology turns around the idea of land is a space, a sacred space, is a space for have a relationship, not only abstraction relationship. And for example, in this word traitraico, is a word I am currently showing in New York now until August in the Whitney Biennale. I propose a link between my body and the waterfall According to Mapuche cosmology, the waterfall is a space for healing, and it's a place where the Nehuen, the force of the nature, converges. And the space of the Trayenco, the waterfall, used to a place for energetic cleaning. And as well, the relationship of looking, for example, remedies or medicinal plants for the Machi, the healer of my community. And they use them for heal other people. Somehow of the waterfall is a remedy, is a sacred space. And in the war, I work on the gesture to return the blue, the sacred color of my community, to the waterfall, for us, a monument of the life. And I think other important part is the idea for me, the landscape, because for the Western society or the Western world, landscape is something without body, without human bodies. But for us, for example, we don't have the word landscape in my community, because nature is part of everything, and we are part of that body, big body. And I think for that reason, I try to use a lot my body into my practice. And in the second word that I put here in Mapukuful, Mapukuful means mushroom, and it's a 3D animation, video animation, and for me it's really important work with materials like ceramic or air or land, but the technological works is very important too, because I think in some point the indigenous artists, the system of art try to put in a box. You as artists, as indigenous artists, only need to do things with your hands because you can think in technology, for example. In this case, in this work, I work with 3D. I work with a taboo for me, of maybe a taboo for indigenous artists. And this work is currently exhibiting in a group shop now in the exhibition Cantando Bajito in Incantation in the Ford Gallery Foundation. And it's word about a child remember the way of relating to the land and asking the permission of the river, recognizing the river as an intelligence. And in this word, I also word the notion of right as important for the Mapuche people, because we always do chalin, the greetings for the spirit that inhabit in the nature always when you arrive in some place. And this word is a relationship between the mycelium, for example. Mycelium for me is like the great Wi-Fi network connect the forest and all the species inside of the forest with the human too. And I feel in this word I try to recreate the idea of a ritual or that in a not traditional material for idea of the ritual too. I think is a provocation in some point too.
Thank you. Wow, it's just always so exciting to hear you both speak. I was thinking about the question of materials, and I want to go back to the question and the notion of history, and how the way that we learn history is through, it's like, I always think of history to have like everything, like that it has another side, has a pair. And maybe this comes also from where I'm from, that there's this duality that is really unity, but it keeps going from one side to the other in a very fluid way. But the way that we learn history is through dates, forms, borders, and we forget the history. So we think of this history, the objective history, and we forget the history that is subjective, that is through bodily experience, stories being passed to us, intuition, observation, speaking with nature, speaking with all the elements. So there's that other part of history that we don't have as much access to. So I'm always thinking about that. And because that history also is related to matter, to material, I think of a care for materials. So a protocol of care for materials. So when I create like this, maybe the image before with the maybe the one before, the one with the drums. Yes, I'm thinking about I'm foraging clay. I'm foraging clay, and I'm also using industrial clay. So really trying to marry these ways of knowing into a form that is like that is operational now. So in these pieces, I am I'm thinking about, I recently had a baby, and the whole experience of birthing is beautiful. And at the same time, there is a certain rush in our society to like, okay, you know, like your postpartum lasts this much and then you move on and you have to work and this and that. So there's like a certain speed that doesn't allow our bodies to come back to its own time and in fact live in a new time. So I did this piece, these pieces, these drums really recently, and I was thinking about technology and how we hear the heartbeat of a child now. Before there were other ways to hear the a child. So you can do it through your hands, or you can put your ears, not really the ears, but you can do it through your hands and you know the baby's fine. But the emphasis is always on the child. It's never on the body. It's never on the person carrying the child. So I remember how they were trying to find the baby's heartbeat, but they found my placenta. And the placenta has this whoom, whoom, whoom sound. And I'm like, wait, what is that? And they're like, it's not important. We're finding the heartbeat. And I'm like, slow down. I want to hear that sound. And then they told me it's the placenta, which is this other thing that grows in the body. And in honor of that, this being that feeds the life inside of me and then exits my body. And there's no, we do have a ritual. We bury it close to certain trees, certain places, and then the child will go to those places and be connected to those places. And there will be a spirit that is particularly connected to the child because that placenta is there. So that's beautiful. But I felt there's so many histories and so many people that give birth, and there's no stories of that placenta. There's no connection to that wombing sound inside of us. So I made these drums that when you play them, they're really just like hollow ceramic vessels that I made a hole on the top and a hole on the side. And when you play them, it evokes that womb, womb, womb sound. So I call them womb drums. And that to me is a form of remembering and a form of continuing a story for ourselves and for also everyone else who wants to hear like that womb. So capturing that is inside and putting it outside. I don't know if that speaks about materials, but I just went on my own to my own place.
It's a perfect anecdote, and also, you know, guides us from materials into process. I love the idea of a placenta that is buried that connects one generation to the next. It also connects to the fungal mycelial Wi-Fi of the forest and to trees and other life forces that you know, are all intricately connected beyond, you know, beyond my own wildest imagination. I'm relearning how expansive these networks and processes can really be. So kind of touching on that, and also something that was mentioned in terms of avoiding a sense of rushing or speed, or, you know, in my case, I crave and desire neat completion sometimes, but remember that perhaps it's more invigorating and interesting and important instead to pursue kind of something that's a little bit less linear and actually more holistically connected. So along those lines, would love for the three of you to just expand more on process. What does process look like to you? Are you thinking about a relationship to process and time that's ongoing, that's cyclical, that's in the past, present, and future? Or, you know, what just, you know, broadly, what process looks like for you?
Well, in my practice, process became a very important element of the making of the work. First I started working with like pre-making, which was like an integral part of my process. I started working with collagraphs, which is a methodology in which you use other objects to create plates or a matrix from which you will print. And then later on, I became really interested in paper making, which offers a lot of properties that you can use in a very sculptural way, but you can also use in a very materially driven way. And in the case of this, the piece to the right, which is currently on view at the Print Center, I use different dyes to pigment or dye the paper. So I use cochineal, logwood, and madder, which are plants and elements, and very specific materials that have a very specific connection to the Native American context, which is also a context that I'm interested in interacting with materially as part of a greater creolization of practices and spiritual interest. And for me, it is a beautiful way to not only create like different mythologies, but different poetic moments that happen materially rather than visually, even though the piece also has a visual engagement. But I wanted to really engage within that material engagement, that spiritual engagement that references very specific elements from North America, but also the Caribbean, and kind of like using those elements to speak about my own identity or my very specific way of thinking about displacement or extraction or ritual. And yeah, I think process is, at least for me, is the thing that I do or think about first before envisioning the piece that I'm going to make. It's like, how does this process engage with the topic that I'm trying to get at? How does this process inform the context in which I'm trying to speak to? And also in my sculptural work, I use materials that claim or try to like occupy a very specific space that almost is contradictory, thinking about like architecture and nature, and how do you combine those things, thinking about vernacular architecture and reconstruction of places or landmarks with these materials that trying to reclaim or recreate the memory of a place or the memory of a culture that is being subdued by colonization and extraction. And that's something that is very important for me to mitigate erasure, which is a larger problem that sort of has expanded throughout the Caribbean, has expanded throughout South America and Central America. And I think it is important to do that in a way that is intuitive to very specific traditions, and using those materials that can speak truly and directly to those specific traditions, which to me is the most important aspect of my practice.
In my case, my practice always work with the idea of archive of document from the past. I think that relationship between the past and the present is really important or has a central place in my practice. I try to find something in the archive to resignify and try to bring this to the present. And in the case of Traitraico, for example, the waterfall work, the process was to have a connection with the waterfall. I usually work with my land, with my space. And for me, that is really important for, I don't know, for the practice or maybe for the relationship with myself and the space. In this case, I think the context is very important, and I am from Chile, and Chile is a nation with water, with a lot of water issues. We have water private here since the 80s, and for the nation or maybe for the state, the water is only a thing, it's only a material. But for the Mapuche perspective, water is a spirit. Water is is the relationship with everything. And with this idea of the neoliberalism, with the colonialism, because work together and create all these trouble and problems here. And I try to do try to show other things, not only show or try to show the idea of abstraction, very literal. I try to use other narrative or maybe reconvert these archives in other things. And for example, the idea of this word was Ulcantún, really old song from the Mapuche community. And a lot of the song talk about the idea of do a rogative or have a special connection with water. And for example, the second word, Mapukuful, was created because I think the fungi or maybe mushroom always has a bad place in the Western society. Fungi is like a shit. It's like in the past, fungi, the fungi kingdom never has a place in the science, never has a power, but for the indigenous community always was a food, always was a place for eat, a place for make a relationship, a place for know the forest really well. And in the video, I try to recreate the good way to extract the fungi, because if you cut the mycelium, for example, in the wrong way, you can damage everything. And for example, in the video, you can saw the child cover the land with a leaf when take something, because it's the way to respect the mycelium. In some point, this video was created too in a pedagogical way from the people use in the future. For example, a lot of people uh, work with fungi in the forest, use this video to explain the good way to cook. And for me, that is the beautiful place or the beautiful power of the art, because can be expanded in other ways, not only the art gallery or the museum. And I don't know, you can think in other way, another possibility to connect with the land and connection with them.
Yeah. For me, process is very connected to time and all the different timelines that we cohabitate. Timelines of motherhood, timelines of being a person in this world, timelines of the political issues that are happening, timelines of my own heritage and how I live and understand it, and also very localized timelines. I'm thinking about, if you go to the next one, that one, the one before. It's I colored for Toshiko. I went to this, I went to the Mahicantuc River, which is the Hudson River. And I'm always listening about how polluted it is and how dirty it is and how you cannot swim, or if you swim, it's a big deal. And I'm also thinking about all these objects that are in museums, locked up in museums, especially here in the US, where people don't have access to them. And I'm always thinking about how the people that come from the same places where these objects come from are alienized from society. And they have to prove that they can be part of society, whereas these objects are untouchable, are so much so that no person outside the museum, it doesn't matter if you're the only person that can play this instrument, it doesn't matter. You're not able to touch it, you're not able to play it, because it's part of the museum, and you are going to bring bacteria that will activate something in the instrument and it will collapse. So it's a really interesting notion of preservation, because all these objects were meant to be used and were meant to be outside in the elements, not in a control area in a museum. And I understand why they do it. And I also don't understand why they don't allow us to have more access to them. So this is always a conversation I'm having, you know, it's just like, there are people that want to pray to statues that are in museums. Let them go and pray to those statues. Let them dance in those statues. Let me have access to Curator, which is the area where I come from, my ancient homelands in Manabi. Let me have access to these instruments so I can play them. And that, you know, is just an ongoing thing. And I think a lot of museums are really rethinking about how they operate and how they have more, grant more access to people. But I think that they're really on like the first baby steps. So I decided, I took it upon myself to start recreating instruments that are archived in museums, and bring them out and share with people and have them, you know, play them. And I'm more interested to know the response of the people playing them or hearing them than learning how to make these instruments. So for this triple water whistle, which is currently on view at Ann Street Gallery in Newburgh, I am speculating that in the future there will be a machine along with mushrooms that will clean the oceans, and they will clean the Hudson, the Mahicantuc Valley River, and there will be a sonic apparatus machine that will create waves, and these waves will dissolve plastic in the river. And how interesting that those same waves and that same hertz are the same that have been in the water whistles that have been buried in museums for a long time. So I'm speculating that these instruments hold power, and they hold a sonic resonance that were created for our bodies. So for this piece, it's in a gallery. It's sitting on a wide pedestal, and I'm bringing it outside the gallery and picking it up and walking to the river. And then I'm going to play it in the river. And I'm inviting people to bring some instruments that I'm bringing and play with me. So we can all hear this object that is lifeless inside a space become alive outside in nature. So that's my process with this piece. And I'm also thinking about constellations and stars and star maps, and how that also has been completely colonialized. the Greek Greek stars that we know. And I'm thinking, well, we also have different stars, and I can look at the stars right now and create my own constellations. So when I create these instruments, I bring them outside to the night, and I look upon the stars, and I see what is created around them. So this is a constellation that I saw when I put it out at night, and I saw this constellation. So that's what I brought. So this idea also of bringing the stars to the ground, or to the earth. There is one other photograph. I think I also, that one is, these are anthropomorphic flutes that were created in the Pacific Coast, especially in the area of Manabí in Ecuador. And they were created for 1,000+ years. And then they suddenly stop. So this cult, el culto, this cult for the women was done. It suddenly stopped. We don't know why. But there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these Valdivias that are called Valdivias, flutes around. I call them umiñas because that is the traditional name, the ancient name, and there's very few words in my own dialect. And umiña, which is the goddess of the earth, healer, the emerald healer of the water, is one of the only words that that still exist. So my daughter, her name is Umiña. So I'm thinking also on carrying this legacy and continuing sounds that we will not be able to hear anymore, because these languages are disappearing, or in mine has completely disappeared. So I'm also thinking about archives and future archives, and how we photograph that which was never photographed. So in this image, I am with my daughter playing this flute, which is a flute that I made for her, but it's also original size. And the background is of rollers that are also from the area where I'm from, that I find in figurines in their bodies. So I make them big so they can fit on my body, and I color my body with these symbols. So that's my process.
Thank you all for attempting to answer a question that I know is huge. I really appreciate your candor and your willingness to share insights into that process and what that means for you. At this point, just for time check, I'd love to invite the audience, if there are any questions for our 3 panelists today, or for an artist individually, to please put them in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you and your thoughts. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and maybe ask my final question. I am new to Print Center, New York, but one of the things I'm learning to love about printmaking as a medium is conceptually how broad it is and what it can reveal in its most expansive sense. So the fact that it is a process that is intended for kind of radical distribution and dissemination. It's an embodied practice that is very physical, that also relies on intuition and a lot of these knowledges that we've discussed today. It's a repetitive action. It can be pedagogical, and it can facilitate kind of a radical broad network distribution, which is something that keeps on coming up in our conversation today. So wondering if you have any thoughts on, dissemination, audience, the public participation, or how you kind of would ideally like to see your work flourish out in the world and among other beings.
Well, I think printmaking, at least for me, has always been a way of not only imprinting a mark or showing like a ghost of a mark. And but it also has a very specific relationship to the body. When you think about like woodcut, when you think about very like physical processes in which you're like engraving marks into a very specific surface to then imprint and create a ghost of that mark, or whatever is a remnants of that mark. And I think it is a tool that, at least for me, it allows me to basically show people like a representation of what I'm thinking, or a very bodily form of expression through a process that it can be very experimental. And that's why I'm interested in printmaking, because it allows for a lot of integrations of methodologies, like within papermaking, but also within sculpture, and how you combine those two things and create a very specific mark that speaks to a very specific community. And in my case, I'm very interested in reaching out to not only like South American community, but also Caribbean community, but also trying to expand that community within like very specific processes and color patterns and materials, to kind of like engage or try to reconnect with people in a way that is material, but is also cultural, but is also physical. So I think printmaking is great to kind of like show that physicality, show that materiality, and yeah, hopefully try to like create an impact. And for me, impact, it is always, you know, the people, right? It's always the community. And I'm really interested when I get approached about my work about, oh, like using tobacco, like is it because of, you know, you're interested in the climate, or you're interested in histories of, you know, slavery, or you're interested in histories of, you know, religion or ritual, which I think all these conversations in a way are interlinked, which basically speak of history, basically speak of colonialism and a lot of the baggages that we have to deal with in trying to speak about our existence or our experience moving in the world today. And I think printmaking is a great tool to disseminate these forms of expression. And the process just allows for a lot of poetic, you know, intersections within, you know, conceptual thoughts, but also material intuitions and material interest.
Okay. It's a complicated question, but I think in this system of art is very complicated. Has a voice, and I don't know, don't have. It's uncomfortable space. The art is seen or art world always. For me, for example, it's always a uncomfortable space, because I think the queer artist or the indigenous artist never has the possibility to speak for ourselves, never has voice, never has anything. And now the representation is very important and the visibility is very important. But I think one important part for me as indigenous artist is show a spiritual things, but try to connect with the political situation too, because political and spiritual is for us the same, or maybe has a very strong connection. It's not about putting the exotic way the humans or the people. It's about has a voice now to defend something and create other narrative, because the colonialism do a lot of struggle in the society and make a lot of violence with everything, not only the human beings, for the species too. And until today, for example, the fungi on the mushroom kingdom in Chile in particular is extract everything, and now traveling to Asia. And we have that kind of new colonization now, and we have a lot of project neocolonialism from the state of Europe here, and we're still living in the colonialism. And I think the art world or the art space is always a revenge, or maybe it's always a political space to use for defend something and try to show other ways or other narrative in the past never has voice. or never has a space for create other things or other narratives. And I don't know, I think that for me, the most important part is the connection between spirituality and the power of the politics to do the same and the both things together.
Alex, I'm going to ask you to rephrase your question. Could you ask your question again?
Sure. I mean, it was broadly kind of about, I guess, dissemination, your relationship with the public or participation, and how you kind of view your work existing or flourishing in the world.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is similar for you, but I come from a family that really doesn't know much about art, and they don't really understand like what I do. And it's important for me that when I do things, not all the time, but that there's some works that they're like, oh, okay, I got that. That's interesting. Like it creates something inside of them, because I think that sometimes the art is a bubble, and we know our audience, and our audience is also in that bubble. And there's this larger conversation and this larger audience that that I would like to reach. So always making sure that I remain true to myself and true to my message. I'm also interested in how that message is being perceived, and how I can continue sharing with all these different in different spectrums and in different groups. Yeah.
I love this conversation, and I feel like there's so many intersections and different ways of approaching all these things. So much food for thought. So I'm just very, very grateful to the three of you. I want to keep it going a little bit longer, so I'm going to share the one question that we received in the Q&A, which is, how do you think about the relationship between resilience and sustainability in your practice or in your personal life? How do you think about longevity or long-term commitments to processes, actions, ideas?
I think resilience is how you keep like your history alive, but also how you keep yourself alive. If I think about all like way back on, in Cuba, like after, colonialism happened, and then you had a lot of people that were displaced of their practice, their home place, and they had to recreate a very different notion of who they were in space. And in my case, as someone that has been displaced, resilience has always been a way of not only keeping myself alive, but keeping my practice alive, and the notion of who I am alive, which I think is the most important aspect of resilience for me, because I feel once you live outside, the place that you were born and the culture that you perceive as yours, there is always a lot of contingencies of, and a lot of like internal forces that kind of like want to put you away from the notion of who you were, who you are. And that way you're easily controlled and you're easily digested by, society, especially as an immigrant. So I feel that the act of resilience in my work is to retain that essence of who my people were, who I am, who I want to be. And also it creates a state of strength and a state of being like conscious of the things that matter to me, the things that I want people to know about, the people that I talk about or the places that I talk about, which I think it is important to do. And I feel materially and my process embodies that idea of resilience with, using tobacco in a way that is pictorial, using tobacco in a way that replaces, let's say, Eurocentric materials of art making, like paint or other things. And I think the work I want the work to have that essence of resilience through a process that is still, you know, in a flux of change, in a flux of adaptation to a context. And I think sustainability is, I mean, it is an aspect in my work, even though it's not per se something that happened in a very conscious state. But I think it is important to understand, you know, when we as artists create an object, like what are the byproducts of creating an object? Because if you use paint, if you use acrylic paints, if you think about like microplastics, every time you wash your brushes down the drain, right? So I feel that as a practice, I've now become more aware of my materials and, you know, the all this, you know, the carbon footprint of, you know, very specific objects that has been used for, you know, for hundreds of years for art making, but nobody ever thought about the footprints of these practices, right? So it is something that I'm definitely conscious about when using, you know, paper making as a form of practice, which is just water and fibers together, right? And using tobacco as a way of creating a mark that is a living element. And to me, that's important, because I feel and that's my own experience of looking at art, when I look at a painting, I feel that there is, even though there is a narrative or there is a visual, you know, stimulation with paint, I feel there is the materials are dead. There is not like materially is dead. So I feel in my work, when I create works that have very specific materials that have a very specific life, it is a different level of engagement, thinking about, you know, something that is alive, something that has veins, something that has a life cycle. And to me, that is important as a form of activation, especially thinking about ritual. Like, how do you create a ritual? What is a ritual look like within art, which it is a hard conversation to have, because ritual in the context of the Western Hemisphere has become of something that is systematic but not quite spiritual. And I feel that in the context of all of our works, ritual is an element that has an essence from a very specific culture and very specific place in the world.
I want to jump in. I was just thinking about what you just said, Jonathan, and I think that the true state of resilience is naturally sustainable. I don't know if that makes sense. And at its core, there is awareness. So by living in resilience, we are being sustainable, because we know we know that a lot of the modes of survival that have been presented to us in this society, in this reality, are not really life affirming. So anything that, when we are resilient, that sustainability just happens. We live in a better rhythm with the earth, in a better accordance with our own materials and our own practices. And that just permeates into everything that we do and who we are. And I think in terms of longevity, at least for me, I'm not interested, or I'm not thinking about myself as I guess as an artist that wants to be remembered. I think that, again, when we live in our true calling, what we make will be remembered, and then by association we will. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both. I don't have any more to say, but but I think in my case the idea of resilience is is really important to understand where you are and where you want for your life, or maybe what you want in your own practice. And and I don't know, it's complicated, the idea of sustainable, because uh, I think, for example, with new medias on technology, we don't see for example, the extraction of that, but everything in our world has that kind of structure. For example, the cell phone or the computer has cobalt or has other uh, mineral extractive in some point of the world. And I think, I don't know, the sustainable part is always a complicated conversation in our world. It's always a very big conversation, because the art world always has some part do extraction in some part of the world, and has a lot of greenwashing everywhere. And I don't know, it's a very complicated question and conversation with our world.
A very complicated question, but an important one. And I feel like we touched the surface, but hopefully one day in the future we can continue talking and thinking through these ideas together. We're at time, so I just want to share for those who are still in the Zoom chat opportunities to see these three fantastic artists work in New York City. So Seba Calfuqueo's video is currently on view at the Whitney Biennial until August 11th. Koyoltzintli will be performing this Saturday, July 13th at Dia Chelsea at 2:30 p.m. as part of West Side Fest. Jonathan Sánchez Noa is currently on view at the Sugar Hill Children's Museum of Art and Storytelling, and then also, of course, at Print Center, New York in New Voices, which is open through August 24th. Thank you, and I'll pass it over to Jen.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you all so much for doing this. I am particularly struck by Koyo, your comment that resilience is inherently sustainable and what that kind of means, and then also Seba, your comment that what did you say, that not the personal is political, which is the thing we always hear, but there was another way that you expressed a similar idea, maybe that the material is also political, or that the spiritual is political, and spiritual is political. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, and that these seem like things that we could, as Alex said, keep unpacking in really interesting ways through your work. And I'm grateful that you all were able to join us today to kind of keep these things in mind as we think about ritual this summer at Print Center, and as we think about these contexts for Jonathan's own work in the show, and how these concepts of ritual inform his own practice as well. Once again, everyone, you can see ritual through August 24th. We have a lot of programming happening in the space this summer, including some tours, more artist conversations, and some hands-on workshops later this summer. And if you're going to come out and see Koyo's piece at Dia this weekend for West Side Fest, come over to Print Center, because we also have an activation happening in our lobby at the same time. So make the leap over when you're in Chelsea, come say hi to us. For the latest information on programming, get on our mailing list, check our website, and follow us on Instagram at Print Center New York. Thank you again, Jonathan and Alex, for collaborating on organizing this. Thank you, Ruben, behind the scenes, for running everything smoothly. Thank you, Seba and Koyo, for sharing your work with us today. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.